This application retrieves recent price data for a stock and displays it with a line graph. It was built with ExcelRT using spreadsheet techniques plus some scripting commands. First, we'll demonstrate the application, then we'll show how you can start from scratch to construct it. So we see a ticker for a stock in this field, and when clicking the update button, it retrieves data, price data for that stock, and loads it into a table. And then that data can be charted out as a line graph. So starting with the end of day pricing information for today and then each of the 15 closing days in the stock market, we have the price open, close, high, and low. So let's take a look at this working in real time by changing our ticker. So this is a ticker for a different stock. So we're just going to click the update button. It's retrieved and charted it out. And this would work with the ticker for any stock on the exchange. We were just looking at our workbook that was running within the ExcelRT workbook. But what we're going to be doing now is we're going to use the ExcelRT builder environment to construct the project starting from scratch. So first we want to click new and give a name to our workbook. Let's just call it My Stock. And we're going to have two sheets within this workbook. The first sheet we'll just call Stock, and that's where we enter our ticker symbol, and it will display the line graph. And we need 4 columns and 3 rows. Let's change the sheet to 2. Okay, and we also want a sheet named Data. And when we retrieve data from the internet about that stock, we need to store it in a little table before we actually display it in a line chart. So we need a table that's going to be 16 columns by 7 rows. And we'll click OK, and now we've constructed our workbook. We see our ribbon of tools for the ExcelRT builder environment, so we can go ahead and build out this application. On our first sheet, named Stock, we're going to bring up the button that allows us to change the width and the height of the columns and rows. So let's start by going from column A to D, and we'll set that at 150 pixels. Click OK, and you can see we made those a little wider. And then we'll open that again, and let's work on the rows. So we have 3 different rows. So the first one, let's make it 50 pixels. And let's do the second row at 24 pixels. And finally, let's do the third row. Let's make that 500 pixels. Okay, so that's the size of our rows and columns for this first sheet. If we go to the second sheet, we'll do the same thing. So we're going to make all the columns across from A to P. We're going to make all of those 70 pixels wide. And then we're going to adjust the very first row. And we'll set that at 200. And then the rest of them we'll just leave it at the default, which is 24 pixels. So we have the starting point of our application. Let's start by merging these first 3 cells and adding a title. So we're going to use the Cell Properties tool. Click in the first one, and we'll type in our title. We can pick the font style we want to use, or just type it in. We'll just type impact, and let's make this maybe 18 would be a good size. And we're going to select bold, and then since this is going to be a merged cell, we're going to merge from A1 to C1. So there's two parts. We got to do the first part there, and then the second part. I see we have to put this in the value field. There we go. So we have our title. And we're going to put the label stock ticker right here. And we'll make this 16 for the size of the font. Go with the default there and make it bold. We can have a place now where the user can type in the ticker for a stock. Let's just go ahead and put one in for starters. We can set that at 14. And let's give it a background color, maybe a light green, so the user can see that they can enter information into that field. And we'll bold that as well. Now this field is going to be a button. We're going to call that update, and we'll make it 14 bolded, and let's give it a light blue background. And in fact, let's take that background color and we'll use it for another button right here. So let's just paste that color in. We'll make it 14 as well. We'll call this one data. Make it bolded. Okay, so we have the starting point here. Let's put a little border around these two buttons, and we can do that with this little border tool. So we just want a continuous border on each of the four sides. So the bottom, the left, the right, and the top. And let's just go with the thin border size. And we'll just take a copy of that border information. That way we can go over here and just apply it there as well. So we have the starting step here for a title, our label, our entry field, a couple of buttons, which will link up to a script a little bit. And finally, we're going to have a chart. So the way you create a chart is you use this tool and you click somewhere. And we'll just call it chart of type chart. And then it's going to put the chart right here. But we have to first set up some data that we're going to chart. Of websites on the internet where you can retrieve real-time financial information. You'll usually set up a free account. They'll give you an API key. They've documented some API commands, and then you'll just use a URL to send a request and retrieve back the data. So for this application, we can do everything we need with a single command, and let's try that now. Basically, this command is just retrieving back a month's worth of data about this ticker. And if we press enter, you can see the data comes back as JSON formatted text. That's a common format that a lot of websites use to supply data. And we have built-in commands in ExcelRT to make that request, retrieve the data, and put it into a JSON structure from which we can easily pull out the individual pieces of data. If we just quickly look, we can see this data is really separated into kind of one collection of data for each day, starting with the closing stock data for the most recent stock market session, where we had the open and the high and the low and the close and a date and other information. We're going to make a button out of this cell right here. And we'll do that using this cell control tool. So let's select the tool, click right there, and it shows how this little bit of script can run some script that we're going to write. And it's actually put that into the clipboard for us. So all we need to do is go to our scripting window and paste in that. And we're going to change this here to the script that we want to write. So this is like when this button is clicked, it's going to run this bit of script. So we need a couple of script commands. So the first command is a var from cell, which essentially is going to create a variable called ticker, and it's going to retrieve the value from this cell reference. And the second command is we're going to call a little subroutine called sub $ get stock data, which will write that on the next line. So let me show you what the subroutine is going to look like. It's going to basically be the name of our subroutine and equals, and then a couple of commands separated by bars. So the first command is a concat command. It basically has a variable and then some little chunks of strings that we want to concatenate together and store into that string variable. So the first thing is our API command that we need to call. And this API command consists of that part plus an equal sign, which is the next parameter, and then this ticker that's being retrieved from the user. And so the end result is we're going to have a variable called URL that has the entire URL stored in it. And then we're going to have a bar in our second command. The second command is an HTTP GET. That's kind of a basic command that allows you to retrieve information from any website. And we only need two parameters, the URL and then the name of a variable where we want to put the string of data that we retrieve from that website. And then finally, we have a JSON from string command that takes that text that we retrieve from the website and stores it in a special kind of data structure, a JSON structure. Most of the internet, when it's providing data to you, it's usually in JSON formatted text. And within ExcelRT, we have some simple little commands for then pulling information out of that structure, which we'll see in a moment. So let's start with what we have so far and go ahead and click the button. And when we do, we ran that command. And if we look at our variables window, we can actually see that we have a variable called ticker with a value of our ticker. And then we have a URL with our string in it for our URL. And then we have another variable called stock data with the data that we just retrieved from that website. After retrieving the live stock data from the internet, we're going to have to loop through that data, retrieve individual values, and then store them in cells on our data sheet. We'll cover a high-level view of those scripting commands, but details of every command can be found in the user guide as well as a lot of other demonstration videos. The first command we're going to use is the while command, where we loop from 1 to 15, and then we run another subroutine called day loop. The day loop subroutine looks like this, and we'll put that on the next line. So in the day loop subroutine, we're going to do a math function where we're going to use the index of this first loop and calculate a column index. That's going to be used later for when we store a particular data value inside of our data table. And then we have another command where it calls another subroutine called stock indexers. The stock indexers subroutine basically defines a variable. In this case, we have a date indexer and another one, an open indexer, a high indexer, a low indexer, and a close indexer. These indexers are a little string that allows you to reach inside that JSON structure and pull out a particular piece of data. So these first few commands, we're simply defining the strings. They're currently empty. And then we're using a little concat command to basically concatenate some substrings into that string. So the open indexer is used to grab the opening stock price for that day. And we basically have the name of our variable and then some data that we want to concatenate together. So in this case, the indexer consists of a string where it's data dot and then an integer, another dot, and then the word open. And if you actually look at the JSON structure in a text editor, you'll be able to determine how that indexer is actually pointing at the exact piece of data we want. And so we have another indexer for the high value, the low value, the closing price, and then the date. Now the date field is a little bit more complex, and we just want to pull the actual day part of that year, month, day field. And so we have another routine that we call to grab that. And you'll see later where that routine is being called. So let's just add that routine here as well. And that is where we can take a value and just at a certain location within the string, just pull out a couple of characters and put that into the value variable. And finally, we have another routine called load cells. And this routine basically is going to use these indexers to grab the value and stick them into different cells within our data sheet. So now I'll show you that subroutine as well. So that subroutine, again called load cells, it uses this command called JSON get value. And as a parameter, it has this indexer string that reaches down into that JSON structure that we created earlier from the retrieved data and grabs the value and puts it into a variable called value. And then it calls the var to sheet column row command that stores the value of that variable at a certain location. So this is the sheet index, so it's the second sheet, the sheet index, the column number, and the row number. And so together, this code is able to loop through 15 days worth of data, reach down into that JSON structure, pull out of each value for the open, the high, the low, and the close, and also the date of that piece of data, and then poke that into different cells of this data sheet. We've now written most of the code required to make this application work. We covered it pretty quickly, but let's just take a look at how it works by clicking the button and running the code. So we're going to click the update button, and now if we go to our data panel, we can see we have retrieved a bunch of data back from the internet, put it in a JSON structure, used indexers to pull out various pieces of data and stored them in the various cells of our table. And let's add some column, some headers here so we can kind of understand what that data is. So this is the open, the high, the low, and the close. And we can, and this first row across here is the actual date going back in time for the last 15 trading sessions. So today is the 6th, and what we're going to do is just make this look like a little more cosmetically pleasing by kind of bolding this row and this column of labels. We can use the cell text color field there, and we're just going to bold from B to P on row 2, and likewise we'll use that same tool and we'll go from A3 down to 6 and bold that as well. So this is our finished table that has been pulled out of the data that we retrieved from the internet. Set up a little stub for our chart control, but we didn't set it up, all the data, and point to some data that was actually going to be charted. So it currently says bad chart setup. So if we click there, it brings up this edit dialog again, where we can go ahead now and pick the type of chart we want, and then we're going to click the edit button. And once we click the edit button, we'll be asked for the range of data that we want to chart. So we're going to chart data from the data sheet, and we're going to go from A2 to P, from A2 to P6. So now we can click OK, and we want to flip the orientation here. And we have different styles that we can view the data in. So just let's see what kind of stuff we get here so far. So one thing we notice is all the data is all kind of crunched up because the prices from day to day isn't dramatically changing. So we're really not using the full real estate of our chart here. So it would be better if we actually started our low bounds of our index at kind of the lowest value in that collection of data, so that things would chart out a little nicer. And that's true with most of the standard chart styles. However, you can customize virtually everything about a style. So if you pick a style and it's not quite what you want, you can go to the components panel and control virtually every aspect of a chart in terms of what gets plotted, the vertical axis, horizontal axis, the fonts, the font sizes, whether or not we start the data, use it like a standard chart, or start the low bound of the index with the minimum data-driven option. And so there's all different kinds of options you can set, and a complete video describing how you can customize every aspect of a chart. But we've already kind of have a custom chart that we've already created, and we clicked the assign, gave it a name. And what we're going to do now, we're just going to go ahead and click that, and look at how it looks with that chart setup. Now we can see our data charted out over time. We have a pretty light color here, so let's go to the data panel and pick some darker colors. And now we have basically what we want to end up with. Let's put this at 50%. We'll click OK and OK again. And here we see the end result of our data all charted out. Let's add a couple of buttons to our application to jump back and forth between the stock and the data sheet. So we're going to turn this cell into a button. We use this cell control tool. We'll just click there. It's set to button, and we have a little bit of script here. If we go to our script editing window and place that, let's put our cursor there to the next line and just go ahead and paste that in. And when clicking on this cell, we want to run the command show sheet data. So we're just kind of naming the sheet that we want to jump to. And then let's also go and add another button on the data sheet. So before we do that, let's grab the color here. Actually, I need the other tool. I'm going to grab the background color. Okay, so I want to grab this color, and I'm going to go to this sheet, and I'm going to just call it chart, and let's click on there with that color tool, background color tool, there we go, and paste in that color. We could also maybe bold it while we're at it. Maybe even increase the size a little bit. Okay, so it looks kind of like a button now. And we might also want to put a little border around it. But that's the main idea there. And then we want to turn this into a button with that same cell control tool. So if we click there, a button, there's the little snippet of code that's going to run when the user clicks on that cell. So if we go to our script editing window and paste in that little snippet of code, and we're actually going to change where it says your script with our actual script command that we want to write. And so in this case, it's going to be a command to show the chart sheet. So that's just the name of our sheet here, and as a parameter of the show sheet command. So that's all the script that needs to be written to make this application fully functional. And now if we want to test it, we can just go and click, and it takes us to this sheet. And if we click here, it takes us to the other sheet. Polish our application a bit by going to the workbook properties and turning off our column and row headers, scroll bars and grid lines and all that. We can also set our window to a fixed size. And the way we do that is, let's just put our minimum, maximum width and height. That way the window will open up at a fixed size, just to kind of nicely fit the stuff we have in our application. So we're going to do that. We're also going to go to the Save Encrypted, and we can, on this dialog, we can enter some information about an about dialog that will be available for our application if we actually take it one step further and wrap it into a licensed standalone app for Mac or Windows. But the main thing we want to do here is we just want to hide this little tab bar across the top because we already have some navigation buttons added. So once we've done all that and we click the Make ERT button, it's now generated an compressed, encrypted ERT file from our workbook, and it should now be fully functional as an application. Let's review how we built this app. We used ExcelRT to author a workbook that contains a couple sheets named Stock and Data. On the stock sheet, we put an entry field where the user can type a stock ticker and then a couple of buttons. When the user clicks the update button, it runs some script. You can see there are several rows of script commands here, and the script is divided into several different subroutines. The basic idea is we're going to use a URL to grab current stock data, bring it into a JSON structure, and then with a set of indexer strings, we can pull that individual pieces of that data out and then store the values for the open, close, high and low prices for each of the last 15 days, and we'll store it into a table, into the cells of a table on the data sheet. And then finally, we can use that to drive a dynamic line chart. Now we've also, once we had our application kind of developed, we kind of productized it a bit by getting rid of our grid lines and scroll bars and column and row headers and stuff like that, and actually even got rid of the little sheet selector across the top because we now have buttons that the user can use to navigate through the different sheets. So if we look at the final result here, we saved it out as a compressed encrypted ERT file, and that file can be distributed to a user with a quick license runtime, and they can just drag and drop that onto there, and now they have a functional workbook, kind of like a complete application. Or you can take it one step further with quick license, wrap it into a finished licensed application with online serial number activation if you choose. Let's take a look at the final result here by changing our ticker to some other stock symbol. Click the update button, and we can see we have a new line graph of the last 15 days of that stock data.